If you're just getting into running or you're a heavier guy or girl, you've probably heard people talking about their heart rate zones. Most people use their heart rate zones categorically wrong, and it's really important that we understand how this relates to us as heavier people. Because if we don't, you're probably going to find yourself injured, tired, not progressing like you should do or want to, or as much as you think you deserve. Today, I'm going to be talking about how you can use the heart rate zones to become a better runner and eventually hit those personal bests. And if you need that extra bit of help with things, I have a free 5K program in the top link in the description. All you have to do, pop your email in and I'll send it you completely free. It gives you 8 weeks of training that's going to help you get that 5K personal best. And of course, I've been there myself. When I first started running, I was 104 kilograms, mainly because I spent years just doing gym training, trying to get as big as possible. Then I realized I didn't like it that much, so I tried my hand at running. And boy, did that humble me. My heart rate was up, my joints hurt, I kept getting injured, all because I didn't use heart rate zones to base my training around. But I managed to overcome it, and eventually I've been able to work myself down to an 18-minute 26 5K, when originally I started at 42 minutes. I ran a 40-minute 10K and a 1 hour 30 half marathon. I've also run a 100-mile ultra marathon in 24 hours, which I'm pretty pleased about. So let's get stuck into what heart rate zones are. Heart rate zones are essentially intensity ranges relative to your max heart rate that we can use to guide our activities. There's 5 main heart rate zones that are pretty widely recognized. The first being a very easy zone and zone 5 being VO2 max. So let me talk about each heart rate zone individually and then how you can apply it and how you would use it in your training as a heavier runner. The first zone is called zone 1, and this is often called your recovery zone. This is very, very easy. You might find that for a lot of you that walking fast might actually get you into this heart rate zone, and that is completely okay. That's why things like Couch to 5K programs really do work, because they incorporate walking and running. Later down the line, you'll eventually be able to go for a very light jog and stay in this recovery zone. Obviously, in this zone, it reduces our joint stress because we're not running fast, and we could theoretically do a lot of it if we could actually stay within that heart rate zone. This is what you would use for your warm-up in most of your training sessions. Then we get to zone 2. This is one you've probably heard people talking about, and for good reason. This is where you want to be doing a lot of your work. Zone 2 is around 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. We're not going to go into how to calculate your max heart rate in this video because it's actually pretty hard and lots of methods are very inaccurate, and I don't want to get pulled apart in the comments. But zone 2 is where we build a lot of our aerobic fitness or our aerobic base. For most people, we get huge adaptations in this zone, and therefore we want to spend a lot of our time in there. Of course, how long you actually spend in there in terms of mileage is completely dependent on how much you are running per week. But the general rule is 80% of your runs should be in zone 2 and zone 1. 20% can be in the later zones that we're going to talk about. Why this is so important is because in zone 2, you're able to accumulate more volume without risking so much fatigue on the other side of the session. For example, in zones 3, 4, and 5, if you do that early on, we'll have to do a lot less, but the recovery demands are a lot higher. Zone 2 is a really good place to be able to build up that baseline fitness and is much easier to progress than the faster stuff. After zone 2, obviously, you have zone 3, and this is often called the tempo. And this would be anywhere between 70 and 80% of your max heart rate. And this is very often when people go completely wrong. Because they are a heavier guy or girl, they'll find their heart rate goes up very quickly. Whether this is because they are unfit is completely dependent on you. If you're new to running, you might actually be unfit, and that is the newsflash that you need to come to terms with. However, if you're slightly heavy, you might find that your heart rate goes up a lot quicker than your lighter friends. And therefore, people spend a lot of time when they first start out just going straight to zones 3 and zone 4. And then they wonder why their joints hurt, they're tired, they're not able to run as much as they'd like to. If you paid attention to your heart rate, you might notice that, cool, I'm actually going into the wrong heart rate zone here. I need to slow down and go for a walk. The biggest thing is that you don't want to accidentally be just tipping into zone 3 all of the time, because again, you'll just end up injured. Obviously, later down the line, it does have some huge benefits because it improves your lactate threshold, really help with your running efficiency, and does help with eventually when you come to booking races. Now we have zone 4, which is often called threshold zone, and this is 80 to 90% of your max heart rate. Again, as the intensity of your work goes up, you need to be thinking about that the recovery from those sessions also needs to go up. Therefore, you need to be thinking about fitting these zones, so zone 3, 4, and 5, into the 20% of your weekly volume. 80% zone 1 and zone 2. 20% is going to be zones 3, zones 4, and maybe zones 5. We'll talk about why potentially zone 5 isn't the best option for heavier guys and girls in just a second. But for zone 4, you could be thinking about some light intervals where you try and move a little bit faster. A great one that I use with my clients is fartlek training. This is essentially a thing called speed play. There's nothing playful about it, but it's essentially where you pulse between going slightly faster and slightly slower. If you're completely new to running, that could be you run a little bit faster, then you walk. It's normally you do it around 1 minute on, 1 minute off. Eventually you progress to maybe 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. This is a really good way for you to be able to experiment with different heart rate zones, understanding your pacing in these heart rate zones, and learn for your future development. And lastly, we have zone 5, which is known as 90 to 100% of your max heart rate. And this is your VO2 max zone. And I would really focus on using this sparingly until you are relatively advanced, until you've been able to run consistently for over 12 weeks. And even then, I would argue that it still only needs to take up some of the 20% of the higher intensity volume that you're going to be doing. The issue is that the VO2 max is the sexy stuff. That's the track intervals. That's the high end efforts that are going to really push your heart rate and the stuff that you see on Instagram all of the time. I would really try and avoid that early on just because it makes your transition into being a better runner much smoother. Another way of getting to zones 4 and zone 5s, if you are a heavier guy or girl, is to use hill reps. Hill reps, hill reps, hill reps. Another reason is that Ingebrigtsen does hill reps, and he's one of the coolest runners ever, and he's also one of the fastest ever probably. Essentially, hill reps, you are running slower, but you're managing to access higher heart rate zones because of the elevation that you are running at. And that is why hill reps are great. You're not just thrashing yourself on the flat surface and actually going faster and exposing your joints to those higher impact forces. You're actually running slower, but you are getting your heart rate up just as high as if you were running faster on a flat surface. So how would you put it all together? Like I said, you do it in 80% easy, 20% hard. And it depends how many sessions you're doing per week. If you're going from no running, I would always say start with 1 run per week. That is a walk and a run. Walk for a minute, run for a minute. Walk for 2 minutes, run for 2 minutes. It's as simple as that. Eventually, when you get yourself up to doing maybe 2 or 3 runs per week, it would always go down the route of 2 runs would be relatively easy, zones 2, and then 1 run would be 3, 4, or 5 in terms of heart rate zone. And that is how I would structure a 3-run week. And of course, when you look at the best runners online, you've got to understand that their speeds, a lot of the time, are just faster versions of yours to stay in the same heart rate zones. If you're seeing your favorite runner on Strava running a 20-kilometer run, chances are that 4 minute per kilometer pace is their zone 2 pace, and they've just been doing this for 10 years. You in your first week of running, it's not comparable, bruv. So don't try and do it. And if you got this far in the video, remember that link for the free 5K program is in the top of the description. Of course, I give out tons of free information about being a heavier runner. Why don't you check out the next few videos on how to get a faster 5K?